Okay. Hey, everybody. I am so excited today to have some guest hosts with me on the roundup. Robbie is on the ground in India, which is a first for Blood Origins, and I'm so excited to see what comes out of that trip. He is over there with our partners, the Wild Origins India. So I know that that is going to be a fantastic trip. So today, joining me for our weekly roundup, we've got Brock Wahl, who is the North Dakota state chair for that BHA chapter, and Chris Borgatti. Am I saying that right?
You are?
Okay, who is, and tell us your full title, Chris, so I don't butcher it.
Yeah, no problem. I am the Eastern Policy and Conservation Manager for BHA.
Okay, awesome. So we are going to talk all things backcountry hunters and anglers today. This is a group that I have been so impressed with the work you guys have done and the growth, frankly, that your organization has experienced over the last, I would say, decade. Um, I mean, I remember when you were just showing up at meetings, some of your colleagues, and just getting started. And I mean, it has just grown by leaps and bounds. So I want to talk about what you guys are working on and some of the bills that you are keeping your eye on around the country. And I want to get a specific update from Brock on what is going on the ground in North Dakota, because it's not just pertinent to your state, but it is so pertinent to all of the rest of us because so many states are fighting these very same issues. So if it's okay, I'd like to start with you, Brock, and you can fill us in. We talked about those three bills, the trio, the CWD bills that were moving through North Dakota last week on last week's roundup. Could you kind of give us an overview of where things stand right now?
Sure. So one of those bills was House Bill 1236, and that bill was, to my knowledge, was going to be the first of its kind in the entire nation. And that bill was basically seeking to prohibit the North Dakota Game and Fish Department from spending any money on chronic wasting disease management. And so that would have basically brought surveillance, education, communication, research, everything to a complete halt. And in my opinion, it would have been sort of like a state law that forced North Dakotans to bury their head in the sand when it comes to chronic wasting disease, because we would have literally been unable to keep our thumb on it at all. Now, luckily, that bill did die in the House, 63 to 27, I think it was, and so that one is no longer, which is good news. We're super happy that that bill died. House Bill 1325 is kind of the companion to that bill, and that bill on the surface looked pretty pretty reasonable in some sense. But if you're familiar with CWD diagnostics and some of the
And remind everybody what that bill proposes to
so
do.
so 1325 was basically requiring that the North Dakota Game and Fish Department produce a microscopic slide of a prion from each positive sample, and that a full necropsy report also be accompanied with that slide.
Mhm.
And this was basically an effort to, and I think you've made reference to this too, is kind of a catch-22, simply because, in order for anybody to extract a singular prion and view it through an electron microscope, I mean, that is an extremely tedious task that is far outside of what most diagnostic labs can do, and the cost associated and the throughput associated with that type of process would basically limit the number of tests that can be analyzed in a year down from thousands to 100,
Right.
um,
And
because
also
you would
far
need.
outside what they need to do. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely, yes. No, I think that was some of the misinformation going around that bill, was essentially trying to say that these tests weren't valid, and so that bill has gotten a do not pass out of the House Energy and Natural Resource Committee,
okay, great,
so that's a
great.
good sign.
Do
We'll
you know what
see
the
what
vote on
happens.
that was?
I think the vote on that one was 11-1. Actually, I don't even know if I should say. I can't remember off the top of my
Okay.
head, but
But
it was
it was a strong
it,
vote.
yep, it was a strong vote to do not pass, and I would expect to see that go to a House floor vote sometime here this week or next week.
Okay. Do you
And
think that
then,
the House vote will probably fall along the number line that the other one did? the funding
Yeah,
bill?
I would assume that that's probably what'll happen. It'll be fairly close. I think the North Dakota Game and Fish Department did say, hey, if there's some concern about what we're making available to the public, we can always just put our positive or our testing information out on the website, so it's a little bit easier to access. But in some sense, we view that as a win. I mean, none of that information was not publicly available upon request anyway. But if making it more easily to look at, then I guess the Game and Fish saw no issue with that at all. And so
Yeah.
I know there's a number of other states that are doing something similar as well, where they have the results of all their tests, just listed on the website, so you don't have
And
to
nobody's
call and
trying to
request.
hide anything. I mean, from my knowledge, states, I mean, are not excited to put out these positive results. I mean, it's almost like a reluctant, like, gosh, we hate this, but this is, what we found.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's their job. I mean, as in many state constitutions and in state statute in most states, there is some reference to the public trust doctrine and the state ownership of wildlife. And so I think it's their, not only, do they have to do it in terms of, being transparent with the public, but I mean, I think they're legally obligated to, do this monitoring and make this data available in some shape or fashion to make sure that the public or the beneficiaries of that wildlife trust are aware of what's going on and have that information that they might need. But I would agree with you that the testing protocols for chronic wasting disease here in North Dakota are extremely rigorous. I mean, it's a two-phase test, and so the false positive or false negative rates on those tests when combined with the ELISA test and the IHC to confirm, I mean, you're talking less than a fraction of a percent in terms of false positives and false negatives. So
Right.
yeah, I would say that anybody who is questioning that has certainly not reviewed a lot of the published science around the field validation of those tests.
Right. Right. And I liken it, like you said, they have a duty to put those findings out. And I mean, it's almost akin to a doctor giving a patient a cancer diagnosis. Nobody wants to hear that. No doctor wants to have to give that diagnosis. But it's like, okay, an oncologist, it's their duty to give the diagnosis and say, okay, this is what we have to do now. Here are the tools we have to fight it. So let's fight this together. Let's treat it. So hopefully that, bill will fail so they can continue to proceed with their regular testing methods and the regular means of managing these, which kind of leads us to the third bill, because that would eliminate some of the methods that they have of managing.
Right.
Yeah.
As you know, the game and fish departments around the country have a very limited tool set. I mean, just you can count them really on one hand. There's just not that many effective tools right now that are out there for managing this disease on the landscape in wild herds. And so, Senate Bill 2137 would be what has kind of been colloquially known as the baiting bill. And this is the second time we've seen this bill. We managed to kill this bill in 2023, and we now are seeing it again here in 2025. They changed the wording up a little bit, and they tried to change the narrative a little bit. But I mean, I think even the representatives and senators I've spoken to, everybody knows what it's about, and it's no secret. But it's basically a bill to prohibit the North Dakota Game and Fish from implementing any type of baiting restriction in the state of North Dakota. And currently what the state has done, so, baiting is sort of a relatively new thing in North Dakota. It didn't really kind of come on until the 90s is when people really first started implementing baiting as kind of a practice. And it's grown in popularity since because it's a extremely effective, tool for a hunter. I mean, I don't know about you. I do a lot of archery hunting, but I know that, there's just not many ways that you can get a deer to stand in an exact spot on the landscape much easier than it is to with a pile of corn or, some type of attractant that you set there. And so what the Game and Fish has done is said, okay, we understand that this is a contentious issue. We understand that this is, something that has a lot of strong emotions involved in it. So they tried to kind of find a middle ground and basically said, all right, well, what we'll do is if we find CWD in a unit, we will implement a baiting restriction in any unit within a 25-mile radius of that location of that animal. And so that's what they've done. And that's basically led to, around half the state coming under a baiting ban. And over the discussion in the 2023 session, they tried to make some concessions to the baiting crowd here in North Dakota. They delayed some of the baiting restrictions that they were trying to implement in some of the units. They also implemented a program to lift baiting restrictions if certain testing numbers were met. And so if the Game and Fish allocates 500 deer licenses, rifle deer licenses in a unit, if they can get 10% of that 500 to be submitted for positives and there's no positive detections, they'll lift the baiting restriction in that particular unit. And so, these were all kind of concessions made to try to, to try to compromise and to try to find an amenable way forward for all parties. Of course, now, my organization, we would have loved to see more restrictive laws implemented, but it's just kind of the conversations that a state agency has to have when they're catering to a wide swath of interests. It can be difficult for them to just pick a side and run with it. So
Right.
This is kind of the middle ground that they have established going forward as being something that they're okay with, something that they think are testing protocols and are testing. So we do a rotational surveillance where we kind of split the state up into quadrants and we kind of rotate that focus. I mean, you can submit tests from anywhere in the state. They'll happily collect them from hunters, but in terms of their dumpsters where they're trying to collect deer heads and where they're trying to go out and put extra surveillance on the landscape, they rotate around the state in a 4-sector quadrant of the state in that matter. But this bill would essentially remove all ability for them to manage CWD through the use of baiting restrictions, which, in my opinion, is a terrible thing. Not only because it takes a tool away from the Game and Fish. I mean, my chapter, we view this a lot as ballot box biology. Really, no different than some of the anti-predator bills or the anti-predator hunting things that we've seen in Colorado and Washington. But also, just if we think about this from a really objective standpoint, going over those tools, the Game and Fish has tools like carcass transportation restrictions. They have, increased tag harvests through hunting pressure. They have the ability to implement sharpshooting calls, which I know are a very contentious issue across the nation with a lot of these culling programs that are going on. But to me, when you look at the set of tools that they do have, well, it's a contagious disease. And so to me, baiting bans where you're getting these deer to show up and eat off the exact same little spot of ground every single day, to me, that's a really low hanging fruit in terms of a tool, right? It's maybe the biggest hammer that they have. Sure. It's maybe the biggest biggest tool that they have. And in my opinion, probably the most effective considering it's a contagious disease, So to me, it would be a real shame if that tool was taken away from them.
Well, and it looks like this has a really good chance of passing. I mean, it passed out of Senate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Passed out of both committee and the Senate floor. And so it's headed to the House. What's the deadline again for when it goes to the House?
Crossover is at the end of the month here, and so I would expect to see that bill appear in the House committee sometime in March. It could be, it'll probably depend on some of the priorities of the committees and what other issues that they have. Sometimes there's some swapping of hands over crossover, so it really depends. It could be early March, could be late March.
And we still don't know what committee it's going to be assigned to yet, right? Or has it been assigned?
Nope, has not been assigned to a committee, and I don't think it will be until they reconvene there at the beginning of March.
Okay, but we will let everybody know when that happens because I think this is an important one for our supporters to weigh in on. Can you give us a quick? All three of these bills were authored by the same person, right? Mm-hmm. Can you give just a brief overview about this author and kind of just a summary of his sort of entire philosophy?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not sure where he is. He's not a North Dakota native. I don't know where exactly he's from. I know he's been in North Dakota for the last 15, 20 years or something like that. But basically, as he's gone out on some public platforms, he's making the case.
And he's not a lawmaker.
No, he's not a lawmaker. He's not a wildlife biologist. He's not associated with any professional wildlife accreditation or career or anything like that. He calls himself a landowner, but essentially he's out on the airwaves claiming that prions don't exist, that they're not contagious, and that CWD positive tests don't mean disease, essentially. So there's been a wide swath of claims. I mean, to be
He's
frank
a
with
science
you,
denier. He is a complete science denier.
when it comes to CWD, I would say that's absolutely the truth. I mean, we have shared a number of scientific publications with him since the 2023 session. Trying to politely show that hey, this disease is contagious. We've done the research around this, and unfortunately, that has really not deterred anybody from changing any stances or any opinions on the issue. And certainly the guys that are in support of him have been very loud and very aggressive for sure.
Brock, you have a podcast up, and can you tell people what the name of your podcast is? Because you've had a number of really good guests on your show. So if people want to go listen to those, tell people where they can find that.
Yeah, so our podcast is just, you can search it on Apple or Spotify, or you can go to the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers website, but it's just North Dakota BHA podcast is all it is. So if you search that, you should be able to find it in those locations.
And I'd like to commend you because you have done such a good job with your own just personal research and the scientists you have reached out to across the country and just the information that you've gathered. So thank you for doing that. There's not that many people who make sure that they are so very, very well informed before they go and educate our legislators and advocate for specific issues. And I think that's one of the reasons that you guys have been so successful in North Dakota. So thank you for doing that. I think that everybody can look at you as an example of how to advocate for these sportsmen's issues. And Chris, you guys are lucky to have him over there. But
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier today, and I had to just thank him because this isn't like keyboard conservation advocacy. He's walking into a room, and many of these people who are sort of taking this position are clearly identified. They're wearing the same clothes, the same shirt. It's not necessarily a friendly, welcoming environment for a citizen to walk in and sort of state their case to lawmakers. Brock is indeed a special BHA member, but there are a lot other people across the country that do similar things. But I had to give him the nod today because of just the unique situation that he's sort of finding himself in a somewhat regular basis. And unfortunately, this spills out of the committee hearing room, right? This spills out onto social media. This spills out into interactions on the street and things like that. So I commend Brock and the rest of his team for standing up for the resource, for standing up for hunters in North Dakota.
yeah, and it's one thing for people in our positions, like you and I, Chris, to call from other states, to call people in DC, to call people at these different state capitals and say, hey, we're with this organization and these are what our members care about. It is an entirely another level and makes such a greater impact when people within the state call their own lawmakers and actually go and meet with them. And whoever out there is listening, if there are issues going on in your state, issues that we've talked about, we can help you get the tools and the data and the information that you need and help you find the right people to meet with. You can reach out to us. You know our Google number. I will pull that up again and tell it to you. You can reach out to Chris. We'll link his info as well. But yeah. So, Chris, I want to get to you and some of these issues that you're working on across
Sure.
the eastern half of the United States, and just maybe give me some of the bills that you're working on right now, and tell me what you're keeping your eye on.
Well, I know we don't want to spend too much time talking about CWD. You've talked about it on the podcast a lot recently. I mean, you've had talked about sort of the deer management perspective and like Mississippi, your own state. But I do want to just quickly mention the Northeast because
Yeah.
What we're engaged in CWD policy work around that here in the Northeast. So in New England in particular, we have not had a single case, confirmed case of CWD. Closest to New England has been New York. They had a case in 2005, which they promptly sort of responded to, and there was not another positive case until this past October. So we're talking in over 65,000 plus tests and monitoring throughout the state. And a captive deer facility had a case in southern Herkimer County.
That was in New York.
And
So it was
in
20
New York.
years between the first positive and the second positive.
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's
they did an
fantastic.
excellent job of containing it. And to put things in perspective, like their containment sort of protocol their response was very aggressive. I mean, they've been very clear on how much resources they threw at this, over $1 million in response to one case in a short period of time. So with that sort of context,
this new positive was in a captive. It was in a pen.
It was.
Okay, so not a wild. So that's good.
Yep. And so they're going to, their response will be similar. They're going to do some culling around that particular area and really do some intensive monitoring for the foreseeable future. Hopefully we have a repeat and we don't see another instance of CWD. So all the states here in New England, just again for context, never have had a case. But we're beginning to see more and more instances of policies coming forth that are intended to deal with this. But because this is such a rare thing, it's not known to lawmakers. Again, for context, in North Dakota, probably, 18, 20% of the population has a hunting license, whereas in most New England states, you're either below 1% or, maybe 5 or 6%, like in a state like New Hampshire, maybe about 10 or 11% in Vermont. So lawmakers may not even personally know a hunter. So to hear issues related to deer, specifically like a cervid-based disease, there's a steep hill to climb in terms of education, and we've been doing that pretty successfully. We just had a regulations package passed, or will be confirmed by the state wildlife board in the state of Massachusetts here, that will address some concerns, and there'll be continued legislation around that in the future. But I think it's an important context for people just to be aware of, that there are regions of the country where this isn't a problem yet. We're trying to keep it that way, but there's a lot of education that has to be done, and just to consider like the amount of education Brock has had to do, and put that into another context where just general awareness of these issues is pretty minimal.
Well, wouldn't that be amazing if we could keep this out of entire regions of the country? I mean, that would be fantastic.
Yep. We'd like to keep it that way. But yeah, our membership, back to your original question, our as an organization, and we rely heavily on people like Brock all over our chapter network across North America, here in the States and also in Canada. And the area in which that I'm sort of responsible for managing is the East, and we use the East pretty liberally. I think I have like 36 states, so it's quite a few states. But I would say there's a lot of let me start with some good news. How about that?
Okay.
So I know you guys have covered like commission and wildlife board reform a lot. You've covered things like in Washington and elsewhere. Right, just this past week, there was a bill, Senate Bill 202 in New Hampshire, which intended to restructure the Fish and Game Commission, essentially removing their authority and putting it solely in the director of the state agency, which is
basically a cabinet position.
Yeah, that puts it all in one person. The proponents of the bill sort of claimed that this was all about efficiency, make things easier for land acquisitions, rulemaking, et cetera, et cetera. But that it was a lot more than that. This is a bill that's been around for a little while, but it still doesn't have the oomph that some of the groups who are kind of pushing this agenda doesn't really have that support yet. So it gives us a little bit of an opportunity. We're less on our heels, and so we had chapter leaders provide testimony to the Fish, Wildlife, and Marine Committee on this particular bill, and they voted the next day, which I believe was last Thursday, that it should not pass. So that was a nice little victory
Great.
that we'll celebrate and learn from, and use it as an opportunity to sort of educate some lawmakers about the role that body plays, and its importance to the state.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good win on that one. That was New Hampshire Senate Bill 202.
That's correct.
And it's
Senate
dead.
Bill 202. So
what else? Do you have anything pending right now that we need to be aware of in any of your states that you're kind of concerned about?
Sure. Well, there's a great opportunity. Like, we don't have, in this sort of space, we're always sort of kind of defending our opportunities. There's a good opportunity to expand our hunting opportunities in Florida right now. So Florida has not had an actual bear hunt for quite a number of years.
I'm glad you brought
the
that
last
up.
one was in 2015, and really, black bears in Florida is a conservation success story. I mean, in the 1970s, there was, I don't know, maybe 500 or so bears, and that number has risen. The Wildlife Commission there hasn't done a complete inventory or population study, but it's estimated somewhere between, I don't know, 10 to 11,000 bears. In 2015, the period of time the last hunt, the estimate around that period of time was about 8,000. And we're coming off a year where Florida had a historic number of automobile collisions with bears, a historic number of human-bear conflict calls. So not only that, like, bears are in 49% of their original habitat. And if you've been to Florida, there's been quite a bit of development in Florida. So to have that return is pretty significant. So we're working pretty hard to try to reinstate that hunt. The commission is going to be discussing it in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully
They
we'll have a
are.
decision.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was going to ask the timeline. I knew that they had instructed the agency to provide them a recommendation on
Correct.
what the hunting parameters would look like for the bear season. Have they given those by now,
So
or they're still waiting
the
on them?
next commission hearing, I believe, I should double check the date. I believe it's the 26th of February.
Okay.
And the Florida chapter will have that information on their
Okay.
social channels, and we also have a good blog post on the BHA website, sort of summarizing the management history and some of the other sort of the science behind it, and the need to sort of this opportunity to reinstate a hunt.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I hope that they go ahead and talk about it, because I knew they gave them, I think, several more months to come out with those recommendations, but hopefully it will be sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So we know what we're dealing with. And so we'll look for your information out there. And
Yeah. And I guess sticking with the bear theme, Connecticut is sort of in a similar situation.
yes.
Connecticut has had bears in every single town documented at this point in time. The vast majority of the bear sightings and the population is in the western part of the state, where it's a lot more rural. But in just 2024, there was over 3,000 human-bear conflicts. And interestingly, bears conflict in Massachusetts, the Connecticut-Massachusetts border, is also very high, with bears sort of coming into the state of Massachusetts. So there's a good opportunity there. That's a House Bill 05021. It's been assigned to a committee. There's no hearing date on that yet, but we're tracking that because, just like we've seen in New Jersey with, reinstatement of the black bear hunt, there, it makes management sense, and it's good for the bear population, and it's a good opportunity for hunters
And
as
let me
well.
ask you this. We talked a little bit about the Connecticut situation last week, and I don't know that a bill had been introduced. Why is that moving through the legislature and not the commission or agency?
Because as far as I know, that state has a statutory statute against bear hunting. So
So
I
it
need
has
to,
to be
yeah, it
changed
has to go through
legislatively.
it has to go through the legislative process to sort of provide that an option to the state agency there.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. Well, we can ask people to weigh in on that one. Um, Fantastic on all this bear news. What else do we need to look out for? You have anything else on your radar in the Eastern 36?
Yeah. So another one that I really appreciate, just from our perspective for BHA, our desire to have public access to fish, to hunt, to recreate outdoors. Illinois has has a unique situation where the vast majority, like the vast majority of rivers and streams are under private control. So only about of the 87,000 plus miles of streams and rivers in the state, only about 2,000 miles are legally accessible
I
for
had
the public.
no idea.
Yeah.
2,000
So
out of 80,000
out
have
of
public access.
87,000. Yeah.
87,000. That is
Yeah.
crazy. Why is that?
So for whatever reason, Illinois did not adopt the basic navigable waterways sort of definitions that the federal government uses. A lot of that goes back to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and so they have adopted their own statute related to stream access. And so, while in many instances this isn't enforced in some places, there are places of high recreational value that it has become a problem where people have tried to block access, block people from certain sections of streams and rivers. So what we're trying to do in that particular case, and there's a House Bill 4708. This is our sort of second big effort leaning into this one. The chapter there has been doing some great work, really expanding our coalition, and to get some more eyes and some more support on this particular bill to expand this access. And recreation, paddling, fishing, duck hunting, whatever your reason for being on the river is extremely important, and we want to make sure that those laws are sort of in line with federal navigable waters.
So is that what the bill would do? Would it change the law so
Yeah,
that it adopts the federal standard?
exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's the case.
How's
Yeah,
it
and that's
looking? Does it have support?
we'll do better this year for sure. I always am hesitant to overpromise on these things because we can get a lot of momentum from the public for something like this, but there's always forces at work that
Wealthy landowners who perhaps own some of these navigable waterways.
So our case oftentimes is to sort of for lawmakers, one thing that they do understand, whether you're talking about CWD, the impact that could have on I don't know, hunting license sales, or expanding opportunity and access to rivers. When we can relay that to dollars, I think that can go a long way for lawmakers because they understand that language and recreation, and whether it be hunting, fishing, paddling, that those are real dollars. That's real impacts to local communities, and we're hoping that angle will carry some weight.
Well, and in that case, can you talk a little bit about on the navigable waters situation? And so it does affect hunters because obviously duck hunters use some of those waters, and we're not talking about small bodies of water like ponds on someone's private land. We're talking streams, rivers, things that people generally have the right to pass through. And opening those up to public access does not mean that the landowner adjacent to those waterways does not have access. So, I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, the sticking point we see on issues, and this is not the only sort of issue like this that's going on in especially in like sort of the Midwest area. Oftentimes, one of the sticky points is during these periods of high floodwaters.
Mhm.
And what essentially happens is that in certain types of boats, you could get beyond the riverbanks, the conventional, the average banks of a river, and up on a field, for
Mhm.
instance, and that has led to some friction points. And understandably, right? A
Yeah.
private landowner all of a sudden looks out and sees a floating duck blind on their property. So, I think we can be sensible and work on legislation like this where we can, restrict access to the riverbanks,
Right.
the stream banks, and get what we're ultimately after.
And they can still regulate individual locations and situations where things like that occur more frequently than others.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so it requires a little more work. I mean, but would benefit the public so much in that
Oh
case.
yeah. Yeah. I guess that leads to another one that could be kind of related. So if you're concerned about access, say you're a duck hunter and you were going to float a particular to river to set up on a bend or something like that. One of the things you're contending with is sort of safety zones and setbacks
Hmm.
from, say, occupied dwellings, things of that nature. So we see a lot of these types of bills, and so many of our chapters, the members, like this is a practical day-to-day situation that hunters find themselves in.
Yes.
And it manifests itself differently in different parts of the country. So um, in South Dakota, there's a bill, HB 1236. What that is trying to achieve is to expand the setbacks or the right-of-way safety zones, how it's called there, from 660 feet to 1,320 feet. So essentially a quarter mile.
And 660 feet isn't a short distance for one of these things.
No, and you're talking about South Dakota. If you were going to compare it to a state like a very densely populated state, like say Massachusetts, where it's 500 feet, and that in itself leads to a lot of problems. To go to 1,320 feet is a big deal because essentially, you're eliminating hundreds of miles of potentially
So
publicly
much public
accessible.
access. So
Yeah.
much. Do we know, have they figured out exactly how much public access would be lost in South Dakota by expanding this safety zone?
No, this one's a difficult one to calculate because the way it's sort of written is occupied dwellings, churches, schools, things like that. So, um,
I assume
but
private hunting clubs on the
yeah,
on the boundary between
oh,
public
totally,
wildlife management areas.
yeah, and that's a real situation, and you can't be within that. Even like, let's say you were like a hypothetical, if you were on like a wildlife management area where you are permitted to hunt, and there's an occupied dwelling, someone's home happens to be bordering, they could they essentially can cut pretty far into public land that they could essentially keep to themselves.
Right. Well, that's the problem. A lot of these that attempt to expand the quote safety zone tend to lean in favor of the private landowner because
Mhm.
they gain so much of what is lost from the public aspect side, and that aspect the private landowner gains because they can still hunt in that area.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are difficult. These are difficult. I mean, look, I'm a landowner. I get it, but there is so much less opportunity for public hunters out there already. So it's very
Yeah.
hard for me to be in favor of any of these bills that expand the safety zone and restrict public access in any way,
And
unless
it
it's a
plays
true
out.
safety factor. And usually, I've found that they aren't.
Sure. I mean, there's a bill in Massachusetts as well. And this, so there's a couple setback bills related to archery hunting. So in a state like Massachusetts, where you have a very high deer density, and the state management, the state agency is doing their best to try to manage these deer, particularly in these sort of suburban zones. So they treat a firearm the same as a piece of archery equipment in terms of setbacks. So it would go a tremendous way in opening up opportunity. And it would go a tremendous way in terms of potential impact, conservation impact, to expand archery, to reduce that, even if it was, say, 250 feet. Because as everybody knows, an arrow's trajectory is a lot different than that of a shotgun slug, or even a
Yeah.
in Massachusetts, they're not allowed to use rifle, so it would be a slug, or buckshot or something.
Does their incredibly high deer density have anything to do with the low rate of hunters in Massachusetts?
It does. It does. That's a big part of it. And the fact that many local communities have zoning restrictions that do not allow discharge of an arrow or a shotgun without landowner permission, and even in some cases, none. So that gets very, very complicated very, very quickly. So unless you're on a piece of public land, like a wildlife management area, in one of these communities, which doesn't exist in a lot of these communities, the deer populations can get tremendously high. And it's not like you might have deer numbers of 30, 40 deer per square mile, but that's very different in a suburban landscape than one that has a lot of agriculture on it.
Right. So has the bill in Massachusetts been introduced? That's to reduce
It
the
is,
setback?
and off the top of my head, I don't recall that bill number. There's two, I believe. And that legislative session's a little bit slower burn. So that team, the Massachusetts and the New England chapter, they've got a little bit more time to deal with some of these.
If you'll send that to me, we can put those up for people.
Definitely.
But yeah, that'd be real good news over there. Sorry, my lab seems to be wanting to interrupt us. Join the podcast.
No problem.
Just in general, from a BHA standpoint, I know you guys have some really, really active chapters, and then some of them are more regional. Are there any states in particular that you want to try to, or need to form a specific chapter, and are looking for people interested to help form the BHA chapter?
Yeah, technically we have coverage. We do have some sort of regional chapters like New England or the Southeast, but technically the only chapter that we currently don't have a chapter structure is Hawaii.
Okay.
And we've got a bunch of members in Hawaii. I'm not quite sure, but people always link them to me. I don't know if it's because I do some surfing or something like that, but we've got coverage in every state in some capacity or another.
Okay.
So yeah.
Is the goal to end up with a state chapter in every state, or are you guys going to try to maintain those regional chapters like the Southeast chapter? I'm just asking because I would love to have a Mississippi chapter,
Yeah, no, I think that would be a good place to be at. Like, to be honest, and a lot of those conversations are happening above me.
Mm-hmm.
What we want to do is, where we have energy and where we have people like Brock, or even people who are half as engaged as Brock, we want to give them the resources and be a force multiplier in their effort to find good conservation outcomes and to protect the things that we're passionate about and then we hold dear. So like where there is that energy, like we're gonna put resources. Like I'll spend time working with them, training them, building the skills that they need to be effective in this advocacy space. So that's sort of been our approach, and it served us pretty well. Like we are unique in the sense that we rely really, really heavily on the grassroots sort of nature of our organization. Like we are consistently punching way above our weight in terms of what we're able to accomplish. We're a small staff and like professional staff, and we take on a great deal, but it's really the people like Brock and others and the chapters that are really like they're in the room. They're at the committee hearings. They're meeting with state lawmakers. They're meeting with the state agency officials and finding out where they can chip in and lend a hand on a conservation project. Like that's where we have that's where we're making a difference.
Chris, can you tell everybody what your email address is in case they want to get in touch with you?
Sure. My email is Borgatti, BORGATTI at backcountryhunters.org.
And then Brock, will you tell everyone what yours is?
You can reach us at North Dakota at backcountryhunters.org.
Okay,
just
awesome.
the state spelled out.
And just in case anyone thinks Brock has any superpowers, I mean, I think he sort of does, but you don't have to be in the conservation world or a biologist or anything like that. I mean, Brock, your day job is not in wildlife, right?
No, I work in the oil and gas industry, and I mean, just a quick pitch for BHA. I've been involved in conservation now for about 15 years, and I started out doing the typical, helping out with banquets and selling raffle tickets, and there's certainly a space for that. And you look at some organizations who have been able to kind of turn that banquet fundraising model into a very successful model. That's put a lot of money on the ground and done a lot of good for hunting. So I'm not trying to belittle that at all. But I think for me personally, one of the things that drew me to BHA was the ability to have some autonomy over the issues that we were getting involved in. I mean, obviously, we are legally obligated to kind of operate underneath the mission of BHA as an organization, and we can't stray too far out of that. But that ability to engage in policy and to be involved with actual decision making was really attractive to me, because the standing there at a banquet just didn't do anything much for me anymore. I just didn't feel as if that was where I wanted to devote my time. And so the ability to be involved with lawmakers and to get into decision making and to write policy, our chapter is also preparing for we have a little over 1 million acres of national grasslands here in North Dakota, and they are going to be releasing a scoping opening for scoping comments on the travel management plan for the Dakota Prairie grasslands here. And so we are preparing and have a team assembled within our chapter to engage in that process, where we'll submit scoping comments, participate in the NEPA process with the EIS, and all of those things. And so, for us, that's a really unique opportunity that you don't get with a lot of other conservation organizations. Those are typically not done by volunteers. And so that was one of the things that really attracted me to BHA. And I was really able to kind of identify with, in terms of, a level of passion and involvement that I really felt was rewarding and something that I could stick with.
That is fantastic. I'm so glad you're engaging on the grasslands effort. So you guys do state and federal basically work up there.
Yeah, each chapter is engaging a little bit on multiple levels. So we like to kind of tier things in terms of state and federal, but that incorporates a lot of other things too. We've been involved with city projects and local water resources board projects. We do volunteer projects. Last year, we started phase 1 of a fencing project where we're inventorying and replacing fencing out in some BLM land here in North Dakota for wildlife-friendly projects. I was asked to participate in the Badlands License Working Group for the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, where we had a group of 4 different members that were brought together to kind of address some issues with overcrowding in the North Dakota Badlands for mule deer hunting and archery hunting. And then also engaging on, state legislative issues, administrative issues, and then of course, when it's deemed necessary or when there's an opportunity, we'll also engage on some federal policy issues as well that are relevant to North Dakota as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm incredibly impressed and incredibly grateful for all that you're doing up there, and Chris, for all that you guys are doing across the country. BHA is truly a vital partner of ours and of the conservation and sportsman's community at large. We see you guys, we show up to things, and you are making your voices be heard across the country. So thank you for all that you're doing. Please keep up the good work. Keep in touch. We will continue our information sharing back and forth so that we can make sure that all of the hunters and anglers out there have the tools that they need to help all of us continue to protect hunting and fishing rights across the country. So I appreciate you guys being on today, and hopefully we'll have you again soon.
Thanks, Ashlee.
Great. And thank
Thanks,
you for
Rob.
everything.